Sorry about that. Good afternoon and welcome to today's hearing on supporting young victims of human trafficking. I'm Althea Stevens, Chair of the Committee on Children and Youth. Sex trafficking is a horrendous crime that preys on some of the most vulnerable members of New York City. Our goal is to assess the city's progress in identifying supports for young victims, strengthening protections for at-risk youth, and ensuring that no child in our care falls through the cracks. We will also be hearing the following bill, Intro 831, sponsored by Councilmember Lewis, in relation to requiring the police department to report on missing persons. The commercial and sexual exploitation of young people is a perverse issue that thrives in the shadows. The nature of this crime makes it difficult to capture reliable data, but we do know it's alarming. Youth in foster care, runaway and homeless youth, LGBTQ plus youth, and those with histories of abuse and neglect are disproportionately affected. Traffickers often prey on the vulnerabilities, offer false promises of love, stability, and basic necessities such as food and shelter. In response, the city has taken steps to combat the crisis. ACS established the Office of Child Trafficking Preservation and Policy, OCTPP, which raises awareness, provides direct services, and collaborate with agencies to deliver resources. In 2023, ACS and DYCD identified 760 youth as sexually exploited or at risk, an increase from previous years. Those numbers include children served through preventative services, foster care placements, and homeless support programs. However, despite the efforts in 2022, audit by the New York State Controller Office revealed significant gaps in the implementation and documentation of these services. Issues such as failures to screen for trafficking indicators and insufficient preservations of critical support serves for safe housing and mental health care. While our topic today is on youth, we cannot ignore the troubling allegations of sexual abuse at ACS run detentions. Those allegations, which have spanned many years, raises urgent questions about why failure and persistent measures have not been taken to prevent further harm. Even today, there was a press conference addressing issues in our facilities. It is wholeheartedly unacceptable that young people are entering the city care faces such risk. We must examine what steps are necessary to ensure the facility's most basic standards of safety and accountability. Our primary responsibility is to ensure the safety and well-being of all children in our care. We cannot allow systematic gaps to jeopardize the lives of young people who are already vulnerable. I look forward to hearing from ACS, DYCD, NYPD, and ENGBV advocates and other stakeholders about how we can close those gaps and improve outcomes about sex trafficking and at-risk youth. Finally, I would like to thank my committee staff, Christina and Elizabeth, for their hard work in preparing for this hearing, and all of my staff and team back at District 16 and the 18. And so at this time, I will turn it over to my co-chair, Councilmember Lewis, but I would like to recognize Deputy Speaker Ayala, who has joined us here for today's hearing. Thank you. Oh, and Holden. Oh, hello, how you doing? And Holden, who's also here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Farrah Lewis, Chair of the Committee on Women and Gender Equity. I'd like to begin by thanking my colleague, Councilmember Stevens, Chair of the Committee on Children and Youth, and Councilmember Salam, Chair of the Committee on Public Safety, for holding this very important hearing. I'd also like to welcome all joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your time and attention. As Chair Stevens stated, we are here today to oversee and assess our city's support for young victims of human trafficking. Our duty as legislators is to ensure our agencies are utilizing discretion to investigate any level of bureaucracy that may further harm victims, and are collectively working, to protect our young people, especially those who are the most vulnerable to exploitation. This is paramount for us here in the Council. In addition to our discussion supporting young victims of human trafficking, we will also be discussing my bill, Intro 831, which would require the NYPD to annually report on missing persons cases. This bill would require the NYPD to submit a report to the mayor and the Speaker of the Council, as well as post on its website a report that includes ongoing detailed information on the number of missing persons reports received during the past decade. The report would also include the percentage of cases where the department has determined that the missing person has become a victim of sex, human, and labor trafficking. Publicizing this data will also hopefully give us more of an insight into this crisis and how we can best work to combat it. This legislation represents a significant step towards transparency and addressing the systemic inequities impacting vulnerable youth here in New York City. The committees look forward to hearing from the administration, advocates, and members of the public and other interested stakeholders who take the time to join us for this hearing. We thank you all for being here today. I would also like to thank my own staff, Daniel Heredia, as well as those of other committees who have worked hard to prepare for this hearing. Finally, I'd like to thank the Women and Gender Equity Committee staff, Assistant Deputy Director Sahar Mazami, Senior Legislative Policy Analyst Christy Dreyer, Legislative Counsel Rachel Conti, Finance Analyst Ali Stouffer, and Assistant Deputy Director of Data Operations Rose Martinez. Now I'll pass it back to my colleague, Chair Stevens.
At this time, I would like to recognize Savina Brooke Powers, who is online, Councilmember Menor, who has joined us, and Councilmember Chris Marte. Salam, do you? I'll now like to pass it over to Councilmember Salam for his opening statement.
Good morning. Good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Yusuf Salam, Chair of the Committee on Public Safety. I want to thank Councilmember Stevens and Lewis for their collaboration on this important hearing examining the city's efforts to provide support for young victims of human trafficking. As discussed by Chair Stevens, human trafficking and the exploitation of young people is deeply concerning. The city has an ultimate responsibility to protect our most vulnerable children, and those subject to human trafficking deserve the utmost care. I look forward to hearing the administration's discussion and the various approaches it utilizes to identify young victims of human trafficking and delivering the services and support often needed by this population. As Chair of Public Safety as Chair of the Public Safety Committee with oversight on the NYPD, I also recognize the ongoing role of law enforcement plays in addressing human trafficking and related criminal behaviors. However, a delicate balance must be struck. I believe that law enforcement should prioritize investigations that seek to identify human traffickers and conduct targeted enforcement that provides significant criminal penalties for those who profit off of the exploitation of young people. At the same time, I believe that it is important for the city to promote the safety and care of young victims of human trafficking and ensure diversion from the criminal justice systems where appropriate. To this end, I am specifically interested in examining relevant NYPD operations and enforcement priorities to combat human trafficking. We will explore how the NYPD is allocating resources to large-scale investigations and how it ensures that young victims of human trafficking do not become entangled in the criminal justice system. We will also explore the human traffic impact certain police practices have on young people throughout the city, particularly critically examining criminal enforcement efforts that might target the very victims of human trafficking that we seek to protect. I look forward to hearing from the NYPD, the other city agencies present, community activists, and my fellow council members as we collectively work towards a safer city for all New Yorkers. Thank you.
I would like to turn it over to committee counsel to swear in the plaintiffs.
Hi, good afternoon. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Joseph Picarello? Josh Levin? Carlos Ortiz? Kathleen Bear? Amy Wilkerson? Samantha Dawkins? Ina Mendez? Sabine Sherry? Marie Moss? Saloni Sethi? Thank you. You may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Ina Mendez. I am the Deputy Commissioner of the Division of Family Permanency Services at the New York City Administration for Children's Services. I am joined here today by Sabine Sherry, the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Older Youth Development Services within the division. Together, we oversee the Office of Child Trafficking Prevention and Policy, which manages our efforts to educate ACS, the providers, and the public on human trafficking, and to screen, identify, track, and provide services to any child or youth who comes into contact with ACS or who has been trafficked. We want to thank Chair Stevens, Chair Salam, Chair Lewis, and the members of the City Council, Children and Youth, Public Safety, and Women and Gender Equity Committees for holding today's oversight hearing on supports for young victims of human trafficking. Unfortunately, and due to its many transportation options and arteries, New York State has one of the highest sex and labor trafficking rates in the United States. Traffickers target those children and youth who are most vulnerable to exploitation, including those who have previously faced trauma, abuse, neglect, and homelessness. So while anyone can be a victim of human trafficking, children and youth in the foster care and runaway and homeless youth are particularly vulnerable, which makes it essential for both ACS and our colleagues at DYC to be alert to trafficking when working with children and youth that we serve. ACS is committed to identifying and helping sex and labor trafficked children and youth achieve safety and obtain resources to help them heal and thrive. In September 2014, the federal government passed the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act to help address sex trafficking and the commercial sexual exploitation of children involved in the child welfare system. Pursuant to state and federal law, ACS is required to screen all children and youth entering foster care for possible tracking, as well as any child or youth returning to foster care after any period of being absent without consent. To accomplish this, in 2015, ACS created the Office of Child Trafficking Prevention and Policy and issued its trafficking policy in 2022, which remains in effect. In short, it requires child welfare staff to screen all children and youth and outline steps for identification, documentation, safety planning, and the provision of appropriate services to children who are sex trafficking victims or at risk for becoming sex trafficking victims, as well as guidance and procedures for children who are identified as labor trafficked or organ trafficked. ACS created the Child Trafficking Database, which is an electronic, cloud-based database in which ACS child welfare and provider agency staff can complete the mandated sex trafficking screening tools. ACS also has a child trafficking mailbox where any ACS or provider agency staff can both report youth as being possibly trafficked and receive expert assistance through one of our master-level social workers in our specialized office. As reported in our 2023 annual report, in 2023, ACS and DYCD jointly identified and served 760 youth who were sexually exploited or at risk of sexual exploitation, of which 457 were identified through various ACS mechanisms, including our child trafficking mailbox, the child trafficking database, our contracted counselors at the Children's Center, our prevention service and FAP providers, our contracted Safe Harbor grant-funded service providers, and through OTDA as a confirmed victim. The Office of Child Trafficking Prevention and Policy provides direct and clinical technical support for professionals, consults with and supports federal, state, city, and community-based agencies, assists in law enforcement recovery operations, and coordinates the Safe Harbor program for New York County, which works to synchronize services for trafficked and at-risk children both within and external to the child welfare system. We are also happy to offer a free tattoo removal service for trafficked or gang-involved youth. ACS's Missing Children's Outreach Unit provides guidance and technical assistance to foster care provider agencies when a child is absent without consent. This unit also works with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and ACS's investigative consultants, who are retired NYP detectives who support on the most challenging cases to find AWOC youth. We also plan for youth's physical, psychological, and emotional safety, which includes referring youth to trauma-informed service providers who are knowledgeable about trafficking. ACS collaborates with a number of organizations such as Day One, the Hetrick Martin Institute, The Door, Safe Horizons, Sanctuary for Families, and many more to provide much-needed services for these youth, including medical, mental health, counseling, career and education, and legal services, as well as support groups, peer mentoring, and art therapy. ACS has also created an ACS Credible Messenger program where adult former trafficked foster care youth share their experiences with child welfare-involved youth to develop trafficking, recruitment, and resource awareness. Further, ACS contracts with the Children's Village and Powerhouse to provide on-site social workers at the ACS Children's Center to screen and assess youth for trafficking indicators, assist staff in identifying exploited youth, and provide recommendations and referrals when needed. They also conduct workshops for the youth at the Children's Center on both trafficking awareness and developing healthy relationships. We believe children who have been trafficked or who are at risk of trafficking need a suite of comprehensive services to not only help them begin healing from the mental and physical trauma of this experience, but also set on a path towards a happy, healthy adulthood. In addition, healthy relationships are a key to preventing and stopping trafficking, which is one of the many reasons we have invested in Fair Future coaches for thousands of youth in foster care and juvenile justice systems. The Office of Child Trafficking Prevention and Policy has trained over 47,000 people since its launch in 2015. We work to ensure that staff in all divisions and provider agencies know how to screen, identify, and serve youth who are trafficked. Every new CPS receives training as part of the onboarding process. At least one person from every foster care and preventive provider has been trained, and every ACS child serving division has a trained liaison. In 2024, we offered 87 trainings that included 12,645 attendees. Some people could be duplicates, in addition to 750 people who took our e-learn session on how to use this tracking tool. I'm including in my testimony information about training sessions currently underway. In conclusion, ACS wants to thank all of our partners, including our sister agencies, our provider partners, and the City Council for all that you do each and every day to prevent youth from being trafficked and to identify and provide services to those who have been exploited. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Stevens, Chair Salam, Chair Lewis, and members of the Committee on Children and Youth, Public Safety, and Women and Gender Equity. I'm Dr. Amy Wilkerson, the Assistant Commissioner for Runaway and Homeless Youth Services at New York City's Department of Youth and Community Services, DYCD. I am joined by Samantha Dawkins, Senior Director of Runaway and Homeless Youth Services. On behalf of Commissioner Howard, thank you for this opportunity to discuss DYCD supports for young victims of human trafficking. DYCD is grateful to have worked with the City Council and other partners to build a comprehensive continuum and ecosystem of services for runaway and homeless youth ages 16 to 24. DYCD's runaway and homeless youth programs are designed to serve youth holistically, enabling them to obtain the services needed to help them thrive. The three types of services include residential services, drop-in centers, and street outreach. Combined, they reach more than 40,000 young people annually. RHY programs serve vulnerable youth, some who have been victims of human trafficking or who could be susceptible to exploitation. Residential services include crisis shelter programs and transitional independent living support programs. Residential programs for young people aged 16 to 20 offer a total of 753 beds. And for homeless young adults aged 21 to 24, there are 4 programs with a total of 60 beds. We are incredibly pleased that Mayor Adams recently announced the expansion of our homeless young adult capacity by 100 more beds. We will look forward to briefing the council on plans for the new beds in the time ahead. At our 8 DYCD-funded drop-in centers, youth are provided with basic needs such as food and clothing, and supportive services such as recreational activities, health and educational workshops, counseling, and referrals to additional services, including shelter as needed. At least one center in each borough is open 24 hours a day, every day of the week. Street outreach focuses on locations in cities where runaway and homeless youth tend to congregate, offering on-the-spot information and referrals. Runaway and homeless youth service providers help young people to address a range of challenging circumstances through counseling and referrals and offering opportunities for youth to meet their life goals while living in a safe and supportive environment. All DYCD-funded RHY programs are required to report youth that have experienced commercial sexual exploitation. Young people have an opportunity to disclose abuse and exploitation at any time. Key moments are during assessment at intake and during regular case management sessions, at which points the young person can receive a range of services, including referrals to specialized mental health services. Providers report incidents of trafficking and exploitation to DYCD on a monthly basis. In fiscal year 2024, out of the 3,110 youth served in residential programs and 2,824 who received case management in drop-in centers, 118 young people disclosed that they were victims of sexual exploitation. All RHY residential program staff members must complete 40 hours of annual training. The mandatory training include information about identifying and assisting youth who have been sexually exploited. Other relevant topics include safety, emergency procedures, HIV awareness and education, case records, confidentiality, reportable incidents, child abuse, and domestic violence. Counselors in RHY programs work with youth to develop individualized service plans to outline short-term and long-term goals. They can achieve a range of supportive services both directly and through referrals, which include health and mental health services, counseling, education and career support, substance abuse prevention, violence intervention and prevention counseling, and housing assistance. When appropriate, staff members assist young people in reuniting with their families or with moving to transitional and longer-term programs. We thank the Council for their investment of nearly $1 million to support victims of human trafficking. This allocation, a first for DYCD, supports programs that offer counseling assistance with mental health, education, immigration, housing, and employment services to victims of human trafficking. Our intergovernmental and discretionary teams can update the Council on the program's impact later this year. Thank you once again for the opportunity to discuss how we are addressing the needs of young people in the runaway and homeless youth programs who may have been victims of trafficking. We look forward to continuing to collaborate with the Council, advocates, providers, and young people with lived experience to improve services for youth. I am pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Salam, Chair Stevens, Chair Lewis, and Deputy Speaker Ayala. I am Deputy Chief Carlos Ortiz, and I'm the Commanding Officer of the Special Victims Unit within Detective Bureau of the NYPD. I am joined today by Director Kathleen Baer from the Special Victims Unit, my Lieutenant Joe Piccarello from the Human Trafficking Squad, and Director Josh Levine from the Department Legislative Affairs Unit. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the NYPD's commitment to keeping the most vulnerable New Yorkers out of harm's way and how to connect those who are trafficked with the resources that they need. Estimates put the number of human trafficking victims worldwide at hundreds of thousands to millions. In the United States alone, some estimates report that 1 in 7 children reported to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children become victims of sexual trafficking. The Human Trafficking Task Force, of which our Human Trafficking Squad is part of, is responsible for investigating both sex and labor trafficking. Our mission is to conduct trauma-informed, victim-centered, and offender-focused investigations. Our targeted enforcement, often focused around hotels, are based on leads from Human Trafficking Hotline, on referrals from Patrol, the Missing Persons Squad, District Attorney's Office, the Department of Education, as well as Administration of Child Services, along with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We then set up encounters. And when there is evidence of trafficking or that the victim is underage, members of the Human Trafficking Squad will conduct a rescue operation, utilizing trauma-informed training to save these young people. Overall, during the calendar year of 2024, we conducted over 300 operations, resulting in 191 arrests of pimps, traffickers, and those who promote prostitution. We rescued over 86 trafficking victims, 27 of those being minors. I want to stress how challenging this can be, as survivors are sometimes hesitant to accept help. But I'm also happy to report, however, that we have many stories of survivors who over time saw a lifeline and thanked us for saving them. One example highlights the effectiveness of our work. A 5-week-long missing child operation which coincided with the National Missing Child's Day on May 25th. This operation, called Operation We Will Find You Too, was a nationwide U.S. Marshal-led operation that included both the NYPD Human Trafficking along with the Missing Persons Squad. This multi-state, multi-city operation focused on what we call critical missing children and covered all 5 boroughs. Critical missing means children who are victims of trafficking who have an aggravated risk factor or factors such as physical, economical, mental health issues. The results of the operation were overwhelmingly positive. In a span of 5 weeks, we helped, located, and recovered 41 critically missing children, 10 of whom had been victims of trafficking. This multidisciplinary collaborative approach provides the best result for our survivors who are transitioning out of a dangerous situation. We work in conjunction with our advocate partners to ensure that we provide the best, most trauma-informed service to our survivors. As I mentioned earlier, exploited or trafficked individuals are often deeply traumatized and trauma-bonded to their abusers and require significant resources and counseling to break that cycle of abuse. For this reason, and not only do we work with advocates from international and national recognized organizations who support survivors of human trafficking, we also work with advocacy organizations within the community. We serve to provide the most complete and culturally sensitive care to our survivors. By cultivating strong relationships with the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Biased Violence, our family justice centers that operate in every borough, we have been able to better serve our survivors by providing information and access to services. Through these relationships, we've been able to connect our survivors with support services, such as medical care, mental health, psychiatric counseling, housing, legal representation for immigration concerns, as well as education opportunities, job readiness, job placement, as well as the basic human needs of food and clothing. We also provide our advocate partners when they conduct direct, self-initiated engagement with survivors. Our outreach effort also goes beyond that one-on-one interventions. We are currently working in conjunction with the MTA and the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Biased Violence on an upcoming awareness campaign that will provide information on how to access services and report human trafficking, which will be seen by millions of people who ride subways and buses every day. This month, we're also putting together a panel of experts to speak at the I-95 Working Group Conference in Tysons Corner, Virginia. Experts from the NYPD, FBI, advocacy groups, the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, the District Attorney's Office, will all come together and discuss emerging issues around sexual exploitation and human trafficking along the I-95 corridor. We're always looking to innovate and expand our reach into those vulnerable communities to provide help and bring traffickers to justice. Now turning to the bill being heard today, Intro 831, would require the department to publish information on our website relating to missing persons. The department supports the intent of this bill, and we look forward to working with the council to craft a version of the legislation that most effectively captures the data and information envisioned by the bill. The loss of innocence these young people experience at the hands of traffickers is immeasurable and should never be allowed to happen. The department is laser focused on preventing and investigating these crimes, ensuring each survivor has access to the resources they need to begin the healing process. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and it'll be my pleasure to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here today. And I just want to start off by saying it was last year at a budget hearing, I had a group of young people who actually came in to testify and told me that I wasn't doing enough about this. So I just wanted to start off by telling those young people thank you for shedding a light on this, and that we do need to be doing more, and that I heard them, and that's why we're here today, because it was them who was like, this is something that's not happening. And then I've been doing a series of roundtables. We had foster care youth roundtable, and then I had foster care youth telling me this is happening and you need to do more. And so in my opening statement, I testified that, this is like the underbelly that no one wants to talk about. And so it's in the shadows. And because it's in the shadows, it's festering. And so today we're bringing light to it, because this is about us coming up with solutions and moving forward and letting those young people know that we're here and we are really putting forth things together to make sure that we're keeping them safe. And so my first question is towards ACS, but honestly, would love to hear everyone to kind of chime in on this, because it's very relevant, and it's things that's happening. Like even in my district today, I had a raid. And so my first question is like, with the executive orders from the federal administration, resulting in like deportations and all these things, and we're gonna have a lot of youth who might be abandoned. This is really actually, to me, is going to help fester things like sex trafficking and sex work for young people, because they're going to be hiding, they're not going to want to come for services. And so for me, my question is, how do we prepare for this moment to make sure that we're keeping young people safe, and what protocols do we have in place, and how are all of these agencies working together to make sure, especially with what's happening and what we're seeing in our city currently, how do we prepare for this moment?
Sorry. So thank you for your question. ACS has a very coordinated response when we have any indication that a child has been abused or neglected. We have the Division of Child Protection. They do investigations, and based on, and while I don't serve in that division, they have a series of protocols they follow to do an assessment to make sure children are safe. Our first goal is to keep children with their families, providing additional services if necessary, and if needed, they need to come into foster care. We look for kin, and if not, we find a traditional foster care placement. That being said, we continue to provide, comprehensive services that are responsive to their needs and trying to keep all children safe. As we think about trafficking, we'll continue our partnerships with DYCD. ACS is the administrator for the Safe Harbor grant for New York County, so we'll continue to do those services with, a heightened awareness that the dynamics of the city and many different things are happening currently, and we'll try to be as responsive as possible.
Does anybody else want to chime into like how we're preparing for this moment?
Sorry.
It's okay.
I think it's thinking outside the box. I think it's looking at different ways, just like Kathleen, my council, along with the mayor's office, thought that MTA, which millions of people are going to see that. So I think it's realizing that we have to be out there and getting this information to these kids, and we have to go to places that they're going to be. They're going to be in certain places, and we have to make sure that those are locations that the posters are up. Those are locations that we're getting that information up. And I think that's working with our partners. I think figuring out amongst us, okay, where are you located at? What can we do to help you? Is there something that we can put out there, information that you need? And I think if we all work together, and I think we all realize that we're all working for the same person, I think that's going to be a huge benefit. But again, like you said, in the times that we're in now, we have to think outside the box. You can't keep going to the same well, realizing that because of the new, what's happening now, you have to think outside. And I really like that the MTA issue, because that's something that millions of kids, millions of people do travel within the subway system.
I just want to just go and say, like, obviously, I think ACS, you guys already have like protocols in place, but I think we are at a place where we need to be thinking outside the box, right? Because the kids might not be coming in to go to foster care and thinking about, they might drop in the RHY center at a drop-in center and things like that, just because it's scary at this moment. I've had parents even today call my office saying they are not taking their kids to school because they're scared of what's going to happen. And again, this is something that's going to fester and allow this to thrive, because they're going to be living in the shadows because they don't want intervention because they think, they're at risk. So I really think that this is a moment that we need to be coming together to come up with a real plan and strategy on how to get the young people who don't necessarily, who can, have placement or things like that, but who are hiding, right? And who are not getting services and not seeking those things. And so, yeah, we do need to go to places that we normally don't go and figure those things out. And so I think it's going to be really important. And so I hope that from this hearing, we can start working towards a more comprehensive plan with all the agencies here. I would like to also acknowledge that we have Vernikov, Councilmember Joseph, Caban, Ariella on Zoom, and Rivera, who've also joined us. This question's for ACS. How does the child trafficking email box ensure confidentiality and responsiveness for ACF staff, contact agencies and providers reporting potential trafficking cases?
Thank you for that question. The child trafficking mailbox was established so that, as either through a screening or through some other source of information, provider staff or ACS staff can send an email to the Office of Child Trafficking and Prevention to ensure that they get the expert consultation, information about services, and follow-up. That information, if it's shared by a case planner, is then they are given the information about next steps. In 2022, we had 117 cases reported to the mailbox. Overall, in 2022, there were 381 ACS cases. In 2023, there were 124 cases out of a total of 457. So a lot of the cases are reported either through the mailbox, through our database, or through some other mechanism. But the mailbox is a good way for people to share information, and so that is how the information is shared. ACS is able to speak to providers, so I don't, regarding the confidentiality, it might not be shared obviously beyond the case planner, but it is used to help inform their next steps.
Yeah. So everyone knows I worked in youth development for over 20 years, and I definitely had cases where young people, it wasn't so clear to them that they were being sex trafficked, but from conversations, you're able to uncover that that's what was happening. And so what trainings are you providing staff around being able to identify and recognize signs of sex trafficking? Because sometimes, like I said, I've had a number of young people who, through conversations, they're like, what are you talking about? That's my boyfriend, or he loves me. And you're like, no, like in my head, I'm like, no, he's your pimp. Like, that's not of what's happening. So just want to know, like, how are we preparing the staff to even recognize that? And so I asked that question to not only ACS, but DYCD as well.
So thank you for that question. The Office of Child Trafficking Prevention and Policy in 2024 hosted 87 different trainings for over 12,000 seats, attended seats. So sometimes people may go more than once, but those trainings talk about what is child trafficking, what are the red flags, how best to screen, follow-up services. We also have an e-learn and a training on the screening itself. So the screening is mandatory, is expected to be done at the beginning of a case, every 6 months, and if the child is absent without consent. And in that training, it talks about the red flags, it talks about how to uncover. You're absolutely right. Children are not, or a young person is not necessarily going to say they're being trafficked or even know they're being trafficked. But based on the training and the information that the attendees get, they're more knowledgeable, and then they can pick up on those red flags. And once a child, if there's an indicator, there's an additional, I won't bore you with all the details, but there's another training. But from there, they can get information on the appropriate services, how best to respond to those needs, and then we provide follow-up and tracking afterwards to make sure those services are being provided and just to kind of see how the child is doing. So they could be trafficked, which is the federal indicator, which means they have been trafficked, or we track people at risk. So that means maybe they weren't trafficked, they maybe haven't disclosed, but we continue to provide services and support.
And what do some of those services look like?
So I'll have my associate commissioner speak about those.
Hello. So some of those services are, we have mitigating trauma through drama. We do group work with our young people. We have our licensed social workers also do those groups where we have the evidence-based models. We have another unit called the residential care permanency planning meeting that does one-on-one engagement with some of the young people that we flag or have disclosed. So we continue to do those engagements because we know at first they're not going to disclose. So we have to build that trust. So we have a team of lived experience staff that work at ACS that actually are working with some of our young people in these settings as well. So it's ongoing services as we identify them.
Thank you. And I guess the same question to DYCD. How are you preparing staff to recognize when there's trauma going on?
Our provider organizations are expected to participate in trainings that help them to identify and support youth that have been exposed or victims of trafficking. And those trainings can be received from a variety of places. Some of the trainings that they receive are through ACS as well as through OCFS. Other providers may select trainings through entities that are more congruent to their organization's culture.
Okay.
But it's all the same: identifying, supporting, working with youth, connecting them to resources and referrals is the foundation of the trainings that they receive.
And so do ACS and DYCD, do you do joint training, especially with like the homeless runaway youth staff and things like that, because it's so connected, especially around sex trafficking? I know you said some of them go, but is there times where there's cross collaboration, like which is like more mandatory and not?
Well, ACS offers the trainings widely, and our staff are able to participate in them. I wouldn't call it a joint training, but ACS provides the trainings, and they're able to participate.
How does the city ensure that trauma-informed care is targeted in services for commercially and sexually exploited youth in this space? Yes.
Sorry. So the city, as I mentioned, it's required that all children that come to our attention, whether it's through the Division of Child Protection, Prevention, or foster care, or any other of our other child-serving organizations, that we do an initial screening, and that is done periodically. That is required, and then if there are indicators or they've been trafficked, there's a set of follow-up that is necessary. Over the years, the last 2 or 3 years, we've increased the number of trainings that we provide so that we can reach, we do live trainings, virtual trainings, we have an e-learn, as I mentioned. So that is how we make sure that the information about the expectation, we also have a policy that outlines the regulations and the next steps in terms of what someone is supposed to follow.
ACS Office of Child Trafficking Prevention and Policy has introduced numerous initiatives, including anti-trafficking counseling, credible messenger programs, and the NYCD Child Tattoo Eradication Program. How does OCTPP evaluate the effectiveness of its anti-trafficking counseling and group work initiative in supporting youth and reducing their risk of exploitation?
I'm sorry, could you say the last part of the question? I'm sorry,
Basically, I'm just asking, how are you guys evaluating the success of these programs, and how are you tracking the work around that you're doing as far as the anti-trafficking counseling and group work initiative that you guys have been doing?
Thank you. So we have a system that we have in place. So as I mentioned, we get information about who's trafficked or at risk. We do follow-up every 3 months where we go into our system of record called Connections, and we'll follow up to see the progress the child has made. We'll also follow up with the case planning organization, whether it's the foster care agency or the preventive agency, to get an update. And as Sabine mentioned, we have a team that will also follow up with youth in residential care settings and or in foster placement to just get an update on how they're doing, if we need to provide additional services. We also have Missing Children's Outreach Unit that if children go AWOC, they will help and assist the agency in following the protocol. We have investigative consultants who also will help partner with the NYPD to help look for youth that have been AWOC, and upon return, another screening is issued so that we can get an assessment of if there are any new flags to follow up on or anything new to report.
What has been the impact of NYCD Child Tattoo Ratification Project since its launch, and how many young people have benefited from the pro bono medical services to remove branding marks?
So we're really excited to have the Tattoo Eradication Project. It started in 2018. To date, 36 youth have been referred, and that is an ACS partnership with medical providers to help remove tattoos. Because the medical services are confidential, we don't have all of the information about the outcome, but we are very pleased, and we find this program valuable because it really allows a youth to get the medical treatment they need to get the tattoo removed, and it is part of the healing process as they continue to recover.
Yeah, obviously. How are adult mentors with lived experience trafficking selected, trained, and supported with the Credible Messengers program?
Our Credible Messengers,
It's broad.
a few, it's off?
Oh, no, it's on.
It's on. So a couple of our Credible Messengers are young people that we've worked with while they were in care. And we need to ensure that young people, it's ongoing trauma that they have to unpack and go through. But we work with them closely in providing their stories and seeing where they're at for them to be the credible messengers. We have had about 6 Credible Messengers that's worked with us throughout the time that we created the program. So what was the other part of your question? Because you wanted to...
No, I was just asking, like, how are they selected, trained, and supported
So,
for this work?
so they receive the same trainings that our office provides, especially the red flags, because these are the young people that know what the red flags are, because they're walking in the same shoes that the young person is that they're working with. So they provide that training, they provide their testimony, their stories, walk with them through those stories. We provide them an overview of some of the policies that we have at ACS, especially the AWOC policies, and just really understanding where they're at as they share their information with a young person and helping them to go through the training that they're in.
And what supports are they given? I mean, because that, you know, obviously a lot of people want to help, but it still can be traumatic to relive that again as you're helping someone else. So what supports are they given as they're going through this as well?
They're continuing to get their own trauma-informed focused therapies. So they're, without disclosing too much of their personal lives, but they are still in therapy and working through their own issues as well, because this is something that's ongoing healing. So we recognize that. They do roundtable healings with our young people when we do groups. I mentioned trauma, mitigating trauma through drama. So it's a lot of like art therapy as well as really acting out and helping them write out their stories to be able to act it out so that they're really seeing what's going on. So those are some of the healing processes that they go through. We also partner and work with Day One on some of the things that the young people are going through to help them, as well as the Credible Messenger, walk through those programs.
What factors does ACS believe contribute to the increased number of identifying sexual exploited youth between 2022 and 2023, and how's ACS responding to those trends?
We believe that with our increased trainings that we've been offering in 2022 and 2023, we have more staff, whether it's ACS staff or the provider staff, that are more comfortable, more informed, more knowledgeable about sex trafficking, how to identify it, how to unpack it, how to discuss it. So as a result of those increased trainings, we think that more youth have been identified because more people are using the screening tools and they're better equipped to do the work. We don't actually know if these numbers are representing more kids than if, you know, we look back 10 years ago, but we have the data. We continue to respond to it, but we do think that with the expanded knowledge base and also knowing how to apply that knowledge, they're able to recognize the red flags as youth that might be at risk or actually trafficked.
Local Law 41 of 2016 requires DYCD and ACS to report on the number of sexual exploited youth in contact with those agencies. In 2023, reports identified 760 such youth. How many of those young people have successfully been connected to safe housing, medical care, mental health services, and other essential supports?
So as part of foster care services, one of the pillars is to make sure that all children in care have a case plan and a service plan. And that service plan needs to be responsive to their needs as it pertains to medical, mental health, education, and other social issues. It's the same for youth that are trafficked or at risk. However, additionally, we would make sure that they have trauma-informed services that are designed to help support them as they begin to heal with those particular, as a result of being trafficked or at risk for trafficking. Additionally, older youth across the continuum, but including youth that are trafficked or at risk for trafficking, have access to housing services. We have an Office of Housing that helps connect older youth to various housing programs. We have a partnership with an organization called Anthos Home, which helps doing housing navigation so that they can find viable housing within the community. We have our Fair Futures program that gives everyone in foster care a coach. 2 years ago, that program was expanded, so even as they leave care, they can have the coach up to 26. We have a college choice program for youth interested in going to college, whether it's a 2 or 4 year degree. For youth that sign themselves out of care at 18, we have a supervision to 21 unit that continues to track those youth. They check in with them, and if needed, if they come back into care, we can help make that transition back into care. So I say that all to say that we continue to support youth who are trafficked or at risk for trafficking with all of these services, but they also get the more tailored, responsive services to sex trafficking and or at risk.
What metrics or systems are in place to track the evaluation and long-term outcomes and well-being of youth? Because, you know, especially folks who are older, and you know, it's interesting because sometimes I feel like we have dualities here where obviously we often talk about like sex work is work and all those things, but a lot of times it starts out because they were sex trafficked when they were young. And so how are we tracking like keeping people out of that and the success of the work and things that you guys have in place?
So I think we're going to have to continue to refine that tracking and develop outcomes in how we measure. We do have a system in place, and I'll have Sabine talk about that more generally.
We proactively created a tracking mechanism about 3 years ago where we quarterly check in to see how young people are doing. So we are listing all our young people that we have come across, whether it's through screening, the mailbox, et cetera, and our team, the Residential Care Permanency Planning Meeting unit, as well as Office of Child Trafficking Prevention and Policy. Quarterly, we go back and we look to see what's happening with the young people, and even talking with those young people if they're still reachable, if we're able to talk to them. So we do that follow-up and then see what additional services are required. And then we work with the planning agency, because as you know, foster care agencies that we contract with provide direct service to our young people.
How does ACS ensure the safety of foster care children from potential trafficking risks posed by individuals residing in or entering foster homes, particularly those who are not required to undergo background checks?
So we work very closely with our foster care agencies to make sure that as they're recruiting foster parents, they're following all of the state regulations as it pertains to certifications. We are aware of a very public case a few years back where there were concerns that while someone connected to the home was involved in sex trafficking. We have not heard of any other cases to that magnitude since then at all. But we do provide a lot of training and information on how to do foster parent recruitment and certification. We've talked to, as a response to that particular case, we did have conversations with providers to make sure as they're doing the home assessment and the self-assessment, they're asking additional questions. If someone says they're divorced, can I see the divorce decree? Those type of things to make sure that people that are connected to the home are safe as well. And then, obviously through regular on-site home casework contacts, doing home visits, speaking to the youth, getting a sense of how the home adjustment is going to make sure children are remaining safe.
Yeah, this was one of the things that came up when I had the Foster Care Youth Roundtable, where they were saying that this is something that needs to be revamped because they had experience where they either didn't feel safe or there was a risk of being sex trafficked. So I think that we do need to like kind of dig deep here around this issue around like other people who are in the home, who are staying there, you know, temporarily and all the things, because this was something that the youth did bring up as a red flag of like, they feel like this isn't being taken serious. And so I know there's only one case that was public, but sometimes when you talk to young people, it's not just one case. It's that usually is the light that's being shined of other things that's going on. And this was something they did bring up.
Thank you for sharing. We'll definitely take that back.
What safeguards are in place to monitor, there are known hotspots such as areas outside ACS Children's Center where traffickers are known to target vulnerable young people. Are NYPD and ACS working together to patrol these areas to ensure the safety of young people? This is another thing that I heard, like outside the children's centers, it is a known recruiting area for pimps and folks who do sex trafficking to stand outside, look at the bags that they have to recruit young people because they know that they're vulnerable, they're outside, they're like, oh, they have garbage bags, so we know we're gonna target them. How are you guys working together to make sure this area outside is safe?
Is my understanding, and I work very closely with the Children's Center, but I do know that they are in frequent conversations with the precinct, and they do work a lot to keep youth safe, because we know sometimes the youth like to hang out outside the Children's Center. They are very, teenagers want to be out and about. So I do know they do have a good relationship. I can't speak to details. Maybe NYPD might be able to speak more, or, but thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we will continue to work with the NYPD to make sure children are safe. There are a lot of activities that have been embedded in Children's Center programming.
And I just want to also point out, it's not just the Children's Center. So what I'm hearing from young people in conversations, that is one of the known spots, and not just from children, but providers, that they're outside children's centers, they're often outside group homes. Like, they know where to go, and they're going there and doing recruitment and talking to the young people. And so I'm a little disappointed that there's not like a concrete plan about how we are making sure that young people who are being targeted in these areas we're able to keep them safe, and really want to hear what does this coordination look like between ACS and NYPD, because this is something that obviously I'm hearing, so we can't pretend like this is not happening.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, was she sworn in?
I can swear in.
Hi. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
chairs. Thank you so much. Hello, Chair Ayala. My name is Wynette Saunders. I'm the first Deputy Commissioner at ACS, and I provide oversight at the Children's Center. We work very closely with Precinct 13 and 17 to discuss all areas of...
He got you a chair.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sergeant of Arms. We appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. So we work very closely with Precinct 13 and 17 and Chief Komodo to really address any needs that we have at the Children's Center, whether it be crime, whether it be sex trafficking. We report directly to them. We meet monthly. Our ICs talk to them very frequently on cases that need to be spoken to before that time frame comes up for our next meeting. We have very close relationships with our NCO officers, Philip and Rondon. We are very close, in very close contact on a number of different issues, including sex trafficking.
And what about the foster care placements? Because I'm hearing that that's a hot spot and they're out there.
So when we hear about those hotspots, because we do cover all our residential care providers, and we get that feedback, we work closely with our investigative consultants who go back to their head, who is Mr. Fay, and we contact NYPD in those areas, the different precincts in those boroughs, and then they do the patrol and go out, especially where our young girls group homes are that are very prone to traffickers. We have the precincts in the Bronx that are always patrolling and working closely with the provider agencies, and they are there.
Yeah, and just to let you know, under special victims, what we do also is to help out patrol. We do roll call trainings. Kathleen Bear is in charge of that in regards to different things that they should be looking while they're out there. So we also pick different situations. Let's say, for instance, to main hospital, where let's say they may have a lot of sexual violence victims that, survivors that go to the hospital, we would train that patrol, like in other words, midnight, saying, hey, when you go to the hospital, these are things you got to look for, these are things you got to look for. So a lot of things that we do in special victims is we help our partners in patrol, saying, hey, you do have, let's say a shelter or foster area in the area, these are things you should be looking for while you're out there, in coordination with everything else. So we do speak to our counterparts and kind of give them ideas that we have through our human trafficking unit and things like that, so.
And I know we spoke about how we are helping staff identify. How are we also supporting young people on identifying like trends and giving them also the information? What are we doing to prepare them, especially because we know a lot of times these places are being targeted. People are looking for vulnerable young people. What are we doing as far as supporting young people on having them prepared to be able to identify it, not only when it's happening to them, but when they're friends? What are we doing around that?
We do some prevention work. There's videos that we use there. It might be a little animated, but we still use it for the young people, called I'm Little Red. We do discussion groups with the young people around that. We have flyers, we do roundtables. We operate a youth leadership council where we have our young people come in and talk and just free talk and find out what's happening. We look at the red flags, because we've created red flags for our young people as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing as far as prevention work. Having posters, having them do a contest where they can share and disclose their talent, but yet and still also expressing what they're going through or what they're seeing, whether they're at risk or trafficked. So we do that as well with our young people.
I have more questions for you guys, but I am going to pass it over to some of my co-chairs now, and then I'll come back to ACS and DYCD. So I'll pass it over to Councilmember Salam at this time.
Thank you. I'd like to begin with a few questions about NYPD investigations and enforcement relating to human trafficking. This is around the how many human trafficking investigations took place, or did the NYPD conduct last year. I wanted to know, how did this compare to previous years?
Good afternoon, Council Member. I'm Lieutenant Joseph Piccarello of the NYPD Child Exploitation Human Trafficking Task Force. So the Human Trafficking Unit is comprised of approximately 24 detectives at the time. This past year alone, we've ran 337 investigations, effected 191 arrests, and received approximately 344 law enforcement referrals. As far as the number of past years, I do not have that data with me at this time, but I'd be happy to follow up with you and provide that to you as far as the last 3 years.
I definitely would like to see that. To what extent is the NYPD identifying young victims of human trafficking in the course of its investigations? Does the department also have any data available on youth identified as potential human trafficking victims?
As far as identifying minor sex trafficking victims, last year alone, we recovered 27 minor trafficking victims. As far as, these investigations are very complicated. So as you get a law enforcement referral or respond to a hospital, and although we suspect it, sometimes, the individual is reluctant to identify as a trafficking victim. As far as capturing that data and saying specifically this is a minor sex trafficking victim, other than the data that I'm providing you today with the 27 minors that were recovered, I don't have anything else to provide.
Of human trafficking investigations, how many relate to allegations of sex trafficking, and how many relate to labor trafficking? Is there a difference also in the investigation of sex trafficking versus labor trafficking, and is the department seeking differences in types of victims subject to trafficking? versus labor trafficking?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Labor trafficking is something that we don't see a lot of. During my last 7.5 years in this unit, I haven't seen many labor trafficking cases and investigated many labor. We have had them, but it's not as common as sex trafficking.
Gotcha. How does a typical human trafficking investigation unfold? Like what units within the department are involved with the investigations and enforcement related to human trafficking, and to what extent does the department rely on enforcement against individuals engaged in sex work as a strategy for identifying and addressing human trafficking?
Okay, so I think there's a couple questions that you asked in there, but we get referrals in many ways. We get them from different units within the NYPD. We get them from patrol. We get them from hospital referrals. We get them from hotline tips. As we receive these, obviously, we take action on them. However, we also take a very proactive approach in trying to identify specifically minors here in the city that are trafficking victims. But like I said, we're getting these referrals from, DA's offices, hospitals, NECMEC. We're getting them from all over.
I know that Deputy Chief had addressed this in his opening statement regarding how many arrests for trafficking-related crimes were made by the NYPD last year. What I want to know is specifically for what specific offenses are individuals charged with when suspected of directing human trafficking, and are there any trends in arrests occurring during recent years?
Yeah, so generally speaking, obviously, we're the human trafficking unit. Our main goal is to investigate sex trafficking. However, you get a bunch of different crimes that are linked into this. You could get murders, for instance, burglaries, grand larcenies. So it's really a mixture of everything. As far as trends go, I wouldn't say that there's a specific trend. I would say that a trafficker is primarily a trafficker, but they're also engaged in a lot of different activities as well. This isn't their only criminal business, so to speak.
Gotcha. So I want to know what proactive steps does the NYPD take to identify human trafficking? For instance, is there a strategy for identifying traffickers that operate online through social media platforms to target and exploit youth?
Yes, so we do our best. Just to go back for a second, the human trafficking unit is comprised of 3 different squads, but all our investigators do our best at trying to open up self-initiated cases, review social media, like you said. We have specific identifiers that we look for. Not only that, but we also take a proactive approach with other investigative tools available to us to identify our trafficking victims as well as our traffickers. I could speak for myself and the other supervisors on the squad. On our downtime, we're going through Department 6 complaint reports, trying to look for specific identifiers which are common crimes committed by traffickers.
In 2017, the NYPD created a dedicated sex trafficking hotline for victims and concerned individuals who want to report trafficking. What I want to know is how many calls did the hotline receive in 2024? How many individuals were under 18? And what training do the officers who staff the hotline receive?
So when I took over in 2022, they actually gave special victims human trafficking. It used to be part of VICE, and they split up because they figured there's more of a coordination with special victims than it was with VICE. Now I have a 24-hour hotline, so I merged the calls together. It's a 24-hour hotline to have detectives handling those calls. So along with calls that may come in, because there's a call that may come in, and like we say, a lot of our survivors may not say, I'm being sex trafficked. they may say a couple things, and that detective on the other line now has to kind of, like you said, read into it, saying, okay, well, you know what, this may be better off going to the sex trafficking unit, and we reach out to them and we give them the cases. I don't have the exact numbers because the hotline, some of those calls at the beginning are not labeled as sex trafficking until, let's say, one of my adult squad special victims investigators speaks to the person and goes, wait a minute, oh, this is a human trafficking, and now they work in coordination with human trafficking because they are part of my unit, which again was the best thing that happened because now they can all work together. And again, I'm big on not re-traumatizing that survivor with having to tell her story twice. So this way, she's told the story to that, let's say, that special victims investigator that first time, and now that's a continuation of pretty much just not getting the other, I guess, by better choice of words, the other troops involved. So that hotline is 24 hours a day. Like I said, it's I have at least 2 or 3 detectives on each tour. They kind of triage all those calls, and those calls come from everywhere. Those calls come from the hospital, they come from ACS, they come from mandated reporters, they come from everywhere. And then at that point, they kind of parse it out to, let's say, Brooklyn child, Brooklyn adults. It could be a transit case, and then it also does human trafficking.
Is there any specific training that they receive in order to work on those lines?
Within special victims, I have specific training when it comes to trauma-informed, when it comes to interaction. All my detectives go through every year a 3-day refresher course, and within those refresher courses, I bring in ACS, I bring in ADAs, I bring in different units in order to speak to certain things, along with my seasoned detectives. Anybody that comes into that unit also gets trained, also mentored by other officers, or investigators, sorry.
You mentioned the bill, Intro 831, that requires the NYPD to report on missing persons. Does the NYPD currently collect data on the number of missing persons reported citywide? And do certain communities in New York City experience higher rates of missing persons? And if so, where? And does the NYPD patrol efforts or other enforcement strategies take into account trends related to missing persons occurring in any given community?
Chair, Josh Levin, nice to see you again. How are you?
Pretty good.
Yes, we do track missing persons numbers. The bill, for example, goes back about 10 years, broken down to SAG by precinct, by gender, by ACE, by race. And I have some of those numbers. We do track those things. I would be leery to give any type of conclusion about trends, right? Because it's a lot of information, 70+ precincts, 10 years worth of data. But what I am comfortable saying is for the precincts that I spot checked, we're seeing some things for trends. Like, for example, the breakdown is around, I would say 60, 70% male, and the rest female. There's always some unknowns or not identified. So we see that. Another thing that I thought was interesting is, again, missing persons is I know we're doing it in context of the human trafficking, but they overlap, but they're not 100% the same, right? Because some people may be reported missing and, they were just hanging out with friends or something, or it could be an elderly person, right? Okay, so I'm seeing in this data that I broke it up into up to 20 years old and then 20 years old and after, because there's a lot of data. I'm seeing disproportionately more people over 21 being reported missing than 20 and below. Because again, missing person is different. You see a lot of numbers skewed upward. When I'm going through these numbers, I'm seeing 80-year-olds, I'm seeing 77-year-olds. My father has some issues, so I understand where that comes from. So that's the type of stuff I think you're seeing there.
Interesting. And this is going to be my last one for now. In 2017, it was announced that the NYPD was hiring an additional 25 detectives to investigate sex trafficking cases. And the department would strengthen training to help officers identify warning signals for trafficking. What specific efforts has the department recently made to strengthen the city's response to human trafficking? And what is the current number of NYPD detectives and other staff dedicated to working on human trafficking investigations?
Excellent question, Chair. And I think that's one of the reasons why they combined human trafficking with special victims, because along with, I forgot what was the number, total detectives? Yeah, along with the 24 detectives, we also have over 300 detectives in special victims. So it's kind of like a common coordination where everybody's working on it. Whatever Joe needs, he's part of the family, for a better choice of words. Whatever he needs, he's going to get. So my detectives also within those adult squads and child squads are also helping the human trafficking unit. And I think that, again, I go back to that was kind of the best thing that happened in 2022 when they actually combined them under special victims.
Thank you. I'll pass it back.
I would like to acknowledge Councilmember Williams, who's on Zoom, and I'm going to pass it to Chair Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. I just want to quickly go back to a question, NYPD. If you could just elaborate a little bit, I wanted to know, how does NYPD collaborate with ACS and DYCD to address trafficking cases comprehensively? And I asked this question because according to a report in 2023, 760 youth served by ACS and DYCD were identified as sexually exploited or at risk, and an increase from that was from 703 in 2022. And then in your testimony just now, your response, I heard 330 investigations, 191 reports, arrests, sorry. So I just wanted to know, like, how are you all collaborating regarding all of those numbers?
Just to kind of clarify that a little bit, the 300 I think 433 you said actually came over as sex trafficking complaints. We do get other complaints within that 24 hotline that come over as just regular a sex crime, not human trafficking. So that's specifically numbers. So we get thousands and thousands of calls within that hotline on a day. I don't have the number in front of me. I can definitely get that number back to you. But on a daily basis, on a regular tour, we could probably get 10 to 15, maybe in 20 calls coming into that hotline. And some of those calls are coming from our partners at ACS, our partners in schools, our partners in different organizations that are mandated reporters, or just someone happened to see, just to make it simple, a child walking by with a black eye. We may get 4 calls on that. The teacher may see it, the school safety agent may see it, the person at the bus may see it. So those calls that he mentioned are specific to saying they mentioned that. So.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Director Kathleen Baer from NYPD. Also, we work with ACS basically as soon as we rescue a child out of a situation. What happens is there's a minimal facts interview done by the investigator to determine as much as they can find out about what happened and see if this is trafficking. And they're immediately contacting ACS to then determine where does this child go and what services are they going to be getting. So that's on every case where a youth is recovered from one of these situations.
Thank you for that. So let's just go back a little bit regarding your response on youth. How many instances of trafficking involves youth occur in the New York City public schools in 2024 based off NYPD's investigations? Like that 330, is that a part of some calls by mandated reporters from the?
Yeah, those calls can come in from everywhere. We don't document specifically where they're coming from.
Is it different from schools? Does NYPD handle it differently if you're getting calls from schools?
No, I think every crime should be handled the same way. In my opinion, I think a survivor is a survivor, whichever way is reported, whichever way it comes in. So once it gets on the hotline, our goal and my detective's goal is to get somebody there, whether it's a school, whether it's a church, whether it's outside, whether it's somebody's house. My goal is getting somebody there as soon as possible.
Do you all have a number of cases of children that may have potentially been trafficked from New York City public schools? Do you have any case numbers on that?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. I also wanted to know, because this is a popular season, right? We're in February, the Super Bowl's coming up. I wanted to know what steps does the NYPD take to protect youth from trafficking during public events, such as large gatherings, maybe Super Bowl parties, school-related activities. What's the process for NYPD?
I think the NYPD in general, in those large events, does focus on that thing. My unit, we do start looking at internet. We start looking at different ways. Again, I don't want to put out a lot of our investigative tools, but there's a lot of investigative tools that we look to see trends, see what's going on, see what we're hearing, and also from our partners, see what they're hearing. Because like the chair said, sometimes you may be not listening to the right group. For instance, you may have someone at school safety that has a great relationship with the kids in the school that's hearing stuff. We have coordinations with the school safety agents. So again, it goes back to what I said from the beginning, is it's thinking outside the box and trying to get your information from as many locations as possible in order to kind of put it together.
Mm-hmm. And just expanding a little bit on the conversation we just had about immigrant youth. I've worked very closely with the 75th precinct, the 6-7 precinct, but mostly the 75th, like the Louisiana area and East New York. So we know that a lot of young people have been trafficked over there. So I wanted to know, how does the NYPD handle trafficking cases involving immigrant youth who may fear deportation or have limited access to resources? You guys answered it before, but if you could just expand on that, because
I'll let Lieutenant Piccarello, he's been all over that area down there for a couple years, right?
Thank you.
So it's not our practice to, number one, ask any of these victims their immigration status. So we handle all these victims with kid gloves. And, so when they come in contact with us, it's obviously rapport building is number one, and obviously trust. So this isn't something that we dive in, and obviously we also look to share what resources are available if they make an omission that they are in fact an immigrant, so to speak.
All right, thank you for, sometimes they identify themselves, but thank you for that response.
Yep, no problem.
This question is for NGBV. Does NGBV currently produce any data relating to human trafficking, including instances of child trafficking?
Good afternoon, and thanks for that question. So right now, we don't have a lot of data that we collect on human trafficking, and partially because most of our data collection, I think as folks have mentioned, is done at the front end when somebody comes in for services, and that's often not when somebody identifies, right? As a survivor of trafficking gets found out later on. But what I will mention is recently this fiscal year, we took on oversight of a few new programs, including the city's 24-hour hotline, and family court-based programs, criminal court-based programs, and we are working with our providers to see how we might be able to collect data about victimization type as part of those programs. So it is a goal that we have. So hopefully, further down the road, we'll have more to say.
All right, and does NGBV share their data, whatever data you have, right? Do you share that data with any other city agencies, NYPD, DYCD, ACS, and how do you all coordinate?
Yeah, so I think, I'll speak to the coordination piece first, because I think that is a role that we play a lot in the city. I think of us as kind of really trying to coordinate, making sure that all of us are speaking the same language when it comes to issues like human trafficking and all issues of gender-based violence. So we actually have a city agency working group that I think everybody at this table has been a part of and includes other city agencies, including many of our public health agencies, DOE and others, where we're sharing best practices, sharing information, and really trying to work across. We share data as it's relevant, right? And I think, and then when it comes to specific cases, it's always sort of with permission of the survivor. If they're comfortable sharing or they want us to, facilitate reporting, we definitely work with our other sister agencies on that as well.
Thanks. And your agency highly relies on outreach, so I wanted to know what type of outreach is your agency currently conducting to focus on trafficking?
Yeah, so we are doing all kinds of outreach. So I think, in terms of our community-based outreach, we work with providers in all of our boroughs to kind of outreach on the topic of trafficking, right? And so our office, I think we're always making the assessment of who's the best deliverer of the message for the community that we're serving, right? And sometimes that's our office, and most of the times it's our office in partnership with our community-based providers who are on the ground. I think in addition to that, I think public awareness, as folks have mentioned, we've done in 2024, we actually in January did public awareness through Link NYC kiosks and developed posters on human trafficking that are really focused on, what are some of the signs that somebody might then self-identify as a survivor of trafficking, and how do we connect them to resources. We also, again, partner, I think, when it comes to outreach, really on that public awareness and that basic information of how do we connect, right? So I think we have our NYC Hope website, which we're continually updating. We're actually working on trying to get map-based resources there, so somebody can pull it up on their phone and look up services that are actually around them, which is, a new feature that we hope to have online soon. We've partnered with the Brooklyn Human Trafficking Task Force on a guide of resources specifically for trafficking survivors, and I think, I think that's something that we're sort of continue to doing more of it. I think as the folks at NYPD mentioned, we're hoping that MTA campaign also really helps push our public awareness efforts further.
Thank you for that response. Can you share the way in which NGBV ensures its work includes the distinction between consensual sex work and trafficking? And I think Chair Stevens mentioned it before, because we want a clear distinction of that for the record.
So I think, again, when we think of our work, right, I say this all the time, our work is to support survivors of gender violence, no matter what they call themselves. So honestly, in some ways, it's for the work that we do, it doesn't matter how you identify. What matters is the violence that you experience and how we can kind of wrap around you to figure out a service plan to address that experience of victimization to get you to a place and a path to healing. That's the number one goal. I think, there's obviously clear lines when it comes to age around the issue of like sex work versus trafficking. So I think that law is one guiding bright line. And so when I think if we were to see somebody that was under 18 who's being trafficked, we'd immediately contact our partners that work with young people, and that would always be trafficking. And then I think the other piece, which is more of an art, is really kind of getting that survivor to identify that experience for themselves, right? So I think it's really like, how does that person...
Your agency helps with them identifying that.
Yeah, as you're having a conversation with somebody, right? How did you end up here? What are the choices you made? Is somebody, I think questions like, is somebody holding your documents? Is somebody taking the money you're earning? Like those are really relevant questions, right? In terms of when we're thinking about trafficking, it's like there is often a trafficker that is there. And so that's another way that we really work with somebody to make sure that, again, as I said, a lot of times we see this in the context of like intimate partner violence, for instance, or in the context of other forms, somebody comes for services around sexual violence, and then trafficking sort of becomes identified through a conversation with them. But I think it's questions like that in terms of like, what do you have control over? What do you have say over? Where is your agency in this? That really gets to that delineation.
Thank you. That's all from me, Chair Stevens.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Councilmember Joseph.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. I want to go back a little bit. How are you improving awareness about human trafficking among foster youth?
We have our ACS Youth Council. We have them go talk to the young people. We also have lived experience staff that's hired that does engage with our young people and informing them about trafficking, awareness. We have posters that we bring. We also have our flyers. And again, we are running a contest now where we're trying to get the young people to engage, whether you're at risk or trafficked or do not want to disclose, but through your art form, you can share what's happening.
What kind of training are you providing for caregivers once they're placed in a home?
So the caregivers are open to join also our conferences to understand what is the red flags. We have the provider agencies that have their MAP training that also provides generalized training to foster parents with regards to red flags, AWOLking, which is absent without consent. So there are some trainings that are guided. We also had Planned Parenthood do some direct training for our young people, whether it's for LGBTQAI+, and also looking at those red flags as well. So that was an open training that was virtual that was provided to our foster parents as well as our young people, because we also had that targeted training for young people to join as well virtually.
How long is the training for caregivers, and how often are they renewed on the training?
So I'll have my deputy answer that.
Thank you.
So as part of foster parent certification, in 2022, we introduced a trauma-responsive informed parenting program that helps foster parents look at things through a trauma lens so they can understand behaviors, maybe if there's a mental health concern being presented, that the underlying cause may have to do with trauma. Additionally, foster parents are informed of expectations. So for example, if a child goes they don't return from school, especially if they're a particular age. They're to report that to the agency immediately. They should follow up with NYPD to make a missing person report, and they are expected to be recertified on various things every year.
So if it's a married couple, for example, both parents are supposed to attend the training, not one.
My understanding is, I need to get back to you on that, around the expectations, depending on who is the actual certified foster parent.
Because as a foster parent, right, you're supposed to list the families that are living in the home. What if I did not list that person, as you heard earlier from Chair Stevens? The trafficking is happening among our young people, and sometimes it's not the foster parent, but it's someone who comes into the home, correct?
So through regular casework contact and home visits, you should be understanding who's in the home, recognizing that maybe and we're expecting that visits on occasion are unannounced so that you can see who's in the home on a regular basis, and then also through conversations with the youth, understanding if someone is not, if the background hasn't been completed, let's say you discover there's someone, a background check is supposed to be completed, there are mandatory disqualifiers, and this is expectations that are outlined. Based on your feedback, we will definitely reinforce this with the providers and make sure that these expectations are met.
There's still young people. I have somebody who's texting me now who was a victim of trafficking. They felt criminalized. How do you interact with young people that's going through that system? Is it led? How the person who's interviewing them, how are they treated? How they feel, right? Because you can make them feel they're a victim, or they can be victimized all over again.
So the training we offer for our case planning staff, our ACS staff, I can't read and see, so sorry.
It's okay.
For the training we offer for the case planning staff, ACS staff, is very trauma-informed. The executive director for the Office of Child Trafficking Prevention and Policy and the staff are all licensed social workers. So we're hoping that in having conversations, in conducting the screenings, it's done compassionately. These young people are not, they should not be treated in any way but as a victim, and they need the support. Even there are times when, young individuals may be encouraging their peers to maybe go AWOC, and even that behavior should be corrected in a supportive manner. So it's somewhat disheartening, to be honest, to hear that they are feeling that way, and we can always reinforce in our trainings. As I mentioned earlier, we give a lot of trainings throughout the year, and we can make sure that as we're developing response strategies, that it's supportive and compassionate.
Chair, can I go? Thank you. And that goes for NYPD as well. What type of training do you offer to your police officers who are dealing with trafficking victims?
So every person in special victims gets a trauma-informed training because, as you say, these crimes are probably the highest underreported crimes there are, and a lot of it is because of that first interaction, be it with police, be it with anybody. So we do within our refresher courses, within whatever training before any new investigator comes into special victims, they do get a training before they even touch a case, along with mentoring program, along with also with the human trafficking. All of our human trafficking detectives, all seasoned detectives, no brand new detectives. These detectives have been on it for a while, and I've seen their interactions, and it's incredible hearing having that conversation and being able to kind of speak to somebody to the point where the person is open. And it is heart-wrenching hearing that from a youth saying that she feels like she's a victim when she shouldn't, because she's done nothing wrong. And I think, hearing that kind of you got to double the efforts when it comes to these trainings and getting it out to even when we do our roll call conversations with the patrol officers, because at the end of the day, the patrol officers are the first ones that are going to interact with these survivors, is just giving them basic things. I'll give you something that Kathleen brought up to me when she first got to the unit, which is, you think about it and say, wow, you have a survivor sitting on a chair. You have an officer, 6'2", standing over her. He doesn't know any better. He's just asking for information. But how do you think that survivor feels at that moment? She just experienced one of the worst experiences in her life, and there's a 6'2" man standing over her. So just simple things like that is what we try to get out to the patrol officers, but within our unit itself, within our training, we do bring in, we actually have survivors that do come into our training and speak to our detectives and things like that, because I think it's important for them to realize that first 5 minutes is key of whether that survivor continues with us or whether that survivor says, why did I even call the cops?
Why did I bother? And how often is that training done for officers in your unit?
I'll let Kathleen touch more.
Sure. So we actually were allotted money for the trauma-informed investigations and interviewing training. So we have an outside organization who is hired. It's a law enforcement professional and a survivor advocate who come in and train, and that's a 3-day training that we're able to give to our investigators twice a year. We were also just allotted funds. The department sees the importance in the trauma-informed training, and especially around youth. So we were just allotted funds to have the National Child Advocacy Center come in and do trainings that are 5 days a week, 3 times a year. That way we can get all of our investigators that are working with minors trained in child forensic interviewing practices. So that was really huge for us, because we used to go through partner agencies like Safe Horizons and ask them, can we have some spots when the National Center comes to train your people? But now the NYPD is giving us the ability to give that training to all of our investigators 3 times a year. In our mandatory annual refresher courses for the child squads, including the human trafficking squad and the adult squads, we have advocate partners who come in and train on trauma-informed practices, how trauma affects the brain, how we see that manifest in survivors. So, and ways to sit down with the survivors and really be able to talk to them in that trauma-informed manner. We also do scenario-based training so that we're testing our investigators to see, we give them a scenario and they have to act it out in front of people who are critiquing them to see how they would interact in certain situations. Another thing that we recently added as of when I started was vicarious trauma training, which is extremely important for the investigators. These investigators are handling the most horrific crime investigations every single day. They're seeing child sexual assault materials, they're hearing from children, they're hearing from adults that have been through horrific rapes, and we need to give them the tools to identify how that's manifesting in them, because if they're feeling burnout from that or just taking every case, like, they need to be able to identify, this is what's happening in my personal life, how can I fix this so I can be the best investigator on my case? So we're really paying attention to that as well. So also in the Chief's interviewing practices, Chief and I interview everybody who's going to be an investigator within Special Victims Division. And that's important because we're looking for people who have a demonstrated history working with children when it's going to be someone who goes in the child squad. Is this a former ACS worker or someone who has shown some sort of passion? Is this a person who worked with underprivileged youth or a person who worked with children who have mental health issues? Because we want that person, because it shows that they have this demonstrated history of wanting to work with these type of people and these type of victims, and not just, I want to go and get my detective shield in special victims. So everything in our training goes to the trauma-informed practices, and we hear from the different advocate partners that we work with and that come in, and we allow them to review our cases for victim interaction and how we're doing, and they are seeing major improvements since all of this training has come to fruition in special victims.
Please continue to scale up and do as much as you can to make sure victims feel respected and treated with dignity. Have you engaged the faith-based community and any CBOs that you're working with? That could go to anyone.
Around this particular work, or just foster care in general?
I can't hear you.
Around this particular work?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Yeah,
aware of, I mean, yes, definitely community-based organizations. Our trainings are open to the public. We often partner with them to provide services. So in that vein, yes, in terms of the training, and then also providing particular supports and services. In terms of foster parent recruitment, we often partner with faith-based communities to get the word out. Foster parents are engaging their own religious family members or within their networks, so whether they're going to a church or a temple or a synagogue, to recruit and inform people about foster care.
We also have worked close with, not on our watch, Reverend Q. So we are working with faith-based organizations. She had arranged with a different faith-based organization a sex trafficking forum, and ACS was part of that.
Okay, thank you. I just have one last question. I read a report not too long ago that as Chair Stevens said, there's always hotspot. They always say right around Super Bowl is the highest time for human trafficking. Are you guys keeping your eyes on any particular area in New York?
Councilmember, off the top of my head, I probably wouldn't be able to think of any. But again, it's also something that the department itself in general, the whole department, whenever those situations come, all-star games, or those big events that would come here, I think we're having the World Cup in a couple of years, those are the times where they really start focusing and looking at those things, using every tool and toolbox that we have.
Yeah, and to piggyback what the chief said, one of the things that we most certainly look at, especially if the Super Bowl, for instance, is going to be in New Jersey or close to New York, one of the things that we look at is obviously hotels, and that's one of the things that our unit does to start looking for, especially minors that are within, posting in Manhattan or I don't want to get into too much specifics, but that's one of the things that we do look at.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairs.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions from DYCD, and some of our members who are on Zoom sent me some questions over, so I'll ask those right after I ask DYCD's these couple of questions. The 2022 State Controller's Audit of ACS and DYCD service found that DYCD does not have procedures requiring its providers to screen youth for indicators of trafficking. Since the release of this report, has DYCD implemented procedures to screen youth at risk for being trafficked?
No, we do not have a specific screening tool that we require our providers to use. They are able to screen the youth that come into the program in the way that they see best for their case management services and their mental health practices of their organization.
But do we not think this is something that's important? Because I think that even especially with like the drop-in centers and the shelters that are operated, that it would be important for us to make sure that, there is some uniformity around screening for this, because they're so in flux when they're coming in.
Yeah, I think that the point that you're making is definitely a valid one, and one that we have been considering since the audit. I think in our exact response was that, it's something that we would continue to look into and to figure a way that we can apply that. But outside of like a RFP process, we're not able to do that just yet. But it is something that we're considering for future implementation.
I mean, we can convene providers and say these are some tools that we want you to implement. We don't need to necessarily do a RFP process to continue to give providers additional tools to implement the work. So I don't want us to fall on that one, because
I want to just clarify what I'm saying is to require them to do it is different than to suggest. We definitely
can strongly recommend, because we are the funders, and we can strongly recommend that we want information, and because it happens all the time with stuff that they don't want, they don't feel like it's necessary. So, I think that when we have situations like this is important for us to be thinking about. How do we make sure that there's uniformity and there is some screening tools, and also giving them support. I don't think, we should do something that's super strenuous, but I think this is something that, after this audit came out, we should have started to put things in place.
We've definitely been discussing and talking about different tools that can be used, but implementation is not present. But we do suggest tools that are viable to our providers. It's just not a requirement for something that they must use. So we do suggest it, but they do have the ability to select the one that they think is best for them.
Yeah. and not to harp here and I'll move on, but I just want us to like make sure, especially even with best practices, because there's a couple of things that could be going on. We know that our providers are often pulled in so many directions, they might even not know to look for it. And so we might have some providers doing it and some doing it better than others. And so I think out of this conversation in this order, we should really be thinking about how do we buckle down and really put together some best processes and strongly recommend in the same way we recommend other things that sometimes isn't necessarily mandatory that we ask them to do. And I do not see any provider being like, we don't want to screen for sex trafficking. I don't see anyone saying that. Like, I know a lot of them, and I don't see them saying that. So I think that we can move in a direction to start getting some work and best practices put in place around this.
Yes, Chair. We continue to require them to screen. Screening is not an option. They all have to screen. It's just in the uniformity that you're referencing. Yes.
What factors the DYCD believes contributes to the increase in the numbers of identifying sexually exploited youth between 2022 and 2023? And how is DYCD responding to this trend?
The difference between those 2 years, of course, there's going to be always some slight variation, but from the previous years, that was actually a big decline. We had significant decreases from 2020 and 2021 as we went into 2022. So there's always going to be some variations. To know exactly where those are coming from, not sure, but we will always continue to assess the needs of the population to make sure that they're getting the supports that they deserve.
Research indicates a strong link between youth homelessness and vulnerability to trafficking. What measures does DYCD take to protect youth in its care from falling victim to trafficking, especially as they're transitioning out of shelter?
I think that for us, the main approach that we've used is ensuring that our providers are trained. This is a requirement is for all of the individuals that work with youth in all of our programs are trained in the identification and also how to work with youth that have been exploited or sexually trafficked. So making sure that they all have the trainings, and we monitor that as part of our program performance to ensure that every single staff member is actually receiving that training. And if they're not receiving it, then it would be compliance issues that would be followed up in our technical assistance and support.
Okay. And I do want to acknowledge we did get an additional 100 beds for 18 to 24, so no one fought harder for that than me, and I know you guys are super excited about it because I can stop asking you about it every time you show up here. So that's one last question for you guys. But DYCD serves up to 24-year-olds, but Safe Harbor Act only provides protection for youth under 18. How does DYCD respond if they identify trafficked youth who are between the ages of 18 and 24?
The approach is the same regardless of the age range. We do not treat a youth that has been sexually trafficked or exploited who is under the age of 18 any different than we would treat one that is 24 years old. We would try to assess their needs and provide them to individualized services that meets their experience and their goals.
Okay. A Covenant House study revealed that nearly 1/3 of the trafficked LGBTQ youth experience exploitation during homeless. What specific programs exist to support LGBTQ youth and address those vulnerabilities?
All of our providers are expected to be able to work effectively with youth from the LGBTQ community. We do have some providers that specialize in providing those kinds of supports. And if a young person identifies that they would prefer to have LGBTQ specific services, they would be referred to one of those programs.
Okay. And I guess even in the same way I asked ACS, how are we also working with the young people to help identify that, not only within themselves, but with others, and also just kind of like have a climate where this is actually being spoken about so they can like be aware?
I think that for the work that we do, there's a lot of like workshops, group work, discussions that take place in our drop-in centers, as well as in our residential sites, where they're discussing, all of these issues and helping to assess the needs of young people. But youth choice and youth voice is the cornerstone of the work that we do in the runaway and homeless youth community. So, if whatever youth identifies they need is what the expectation is that they will receive. So if they want specialized services for a particular issue, and we work with them and we identify that becomes part of their goals, then we would make sure that they receive it, whether it's directly or by referral.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that often to me is like, we're always talking about how are we training the staff up and those things, but I'm real big on like how are we like even shifting the culture within our participants for them to also like be able to identify if someone's like even coming to them with these type of things and like preparing them so they can know how to ward it off. Because sometimes, again, like I said, I worked with young people where they did not know because no one told them like this is not okay. So I really want us to even think about like how do we continue to cultivate these conversations, because if it's not something that people would be proud of, right? And so even with it, understanding that we thrive on like youth voice and choice and all of that, but if this happened to me, I'm ashamed and I don't want people to know, and so it's really hard to allow that. So I think we have to figure out a way to make sure that these are part of our group discussions and in our healing circles and all those things, because it becomes really hard for young people to even want to talk about it, even if it's been identified. It's a sense of shame that comes with it. How does DYC ensure that shelter programs and shelters and programs funded are equipped to meet with the unique needs of trafficking survivors, particularly LGBTQ youth and foster youth?
For us, it would be the same response is really in the training. Working with LGBTQ youth is also required training. Working with youth that have been exposed to sexual exploitation is a required training for every single person that works in any of the programs that come in contact with one of the youth. And this is something that we monitor for performance, and we enforce effectively with our providers.
How does DYCD collaborate with OCTPP and other specialized providers to deliver a continuum of care for trafficked youth?
OCTPP.
Yes. What is that program? What is it called again?
We definitely collaborate with all of our other
Office of Child Trafficking Prevention. Sorry.
We definitely collaborate, with all of our other city organizations. We collaborate with End Gender-Based Violence, with ACS, with all of the different entities to provide the resources that we need for the young people that we work with. We frequently have those various entities present in our provider meetings to explain the resources that they have to our providers so they know how to access those resources. And in more specific instances, sometimes we make intentional connections between providers that may, need more support in that area, or they have specialized population needs directly to those entities. And I know ACS talks about that they have credible messengers and folks who've been in this work.
How is that on the RHY side? Is it the same thing? Do you guys also have like a credible messenger program and folks who are survivors and who've been through these things to also to relate to these young people? Is that something that you guys, work with providers on identifying with staff?
GEMS is one of our contracted providers for runaway and homeless youth services. So GEMS is definitely one of the organizations that uses that model. But outside of GEMS, I think that it's encouraged for our providers to recruit individuals with lived experience and people with adjacent lived experience that can best connect with the young people that we serve.
Yeah, I just, just hearing some of that today, I just think it's just like so important because, again, it does come with a sense of shame. And so to have someone to be able to identify with that at these places, and also thinking about how do we then, if that's not a requirement, how do we then collaborate to then, whether that's them being part of some of those groups and doing the work, you know how I feel. Like, I don't understand why we're not doing a lot of the cross collaboration anyway. If, you know, if ACS is doing it and they have this, then how are we making sure that everyone has access to it? It's all the city. These are all our children. And so, you know, even thinking about if providers don't have that, you know, how do we then open up the space to use the resources that we have? So that's definitely something we should be thinking about and working on, because I think that it's so important that these young people do not feel shame, and that there's other people who experienced it and they've been able to overcome it and understand that there is light on the other side. So we need to figure out how your incredible messengers can go to these, you know, RHY shelters and be talking to these young people and just working together, because I think that that is really important. And I see you guys wanted to add to this.
Yes, just to your point, I also think that that's incredibly important. When we go and do outreach in some of the areas that are prone to sexual exploitation, we do outreach with some of our advocate partners, and they all have survivor leader programs, and they, some of the survivor advocates do come out with us to do that outreach, so that it's not just an advocate or a member of the police department approaching these young individuals. It's actually a person who has that lived experience. So we absolutely agree with you, and we're going to continue to do work in that space.
Yeah. I have some questions from my colleagues who are on Zoom, and because we don't have quorum, they can't act. So this question is from Councilmember Williams. Would you agree that this annual reporting will require increased transparency and public trust in NYPD's handling of missing people? So I believe they're asking about the bill around, do you think that this would help with transparency and getting this information out?
More eyes on something, sure. But what I want to do is I'd love to work with council to actually figure out, I'm telling you, it's a lot of data, right? So I would love to work with you to figure out what gets you exactly what you need without having to be too onerous of a pull every time. You and I have spoken about this before at other hearings. This one wasn't a clickety-clack boop.
You always talking about us, no clickety-clack boop with the data.
I'm telling you, I'm going to keep talking about it because
listen, you could get the data and you could make it clickety-clack.
I did get it, but I spent a lot of time doing a stick count myself, making sure it was in some type of digestible format for y'all. So, yeah, in summary, yes.
All right. Do you could this reporting lead to improved community outreach efforts in an area like Jamaica, where significant immigrant populations, ensuring that non-English speaking residents are aware of the resources available for reporting missing persons? So, you know, I believe she's just hinting at, like, in Queens, they have a big thing around this, especially in immigrant populations and folks who don't speak English. Do you think that this reporting could, like, actually help some of that?
Is the question in regards to missing persons or human trafficking, or
missing
both?
person, yeah.
Missing persons, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think our people internally always have eyes on where we're seeing things spike and where we're seeing things go down. And as a result, we specifically target resources to those specific areas. And that's in all of our campaigns. In the Crime Prevention Division, elder abuse, I appeared before the committee to talk about that. We go to the places where these people are. So we use these numbers to determine what we're doing. So I think we're already doing that. I think this is just something for the public facing, I guess.
Yeah, and that's what she's getting at, like having the community being able to, like, identify some of this information. Because even her next question, would you agree that the visibility of precinct-specific data would empower community leaders and organizers in Jamaica, Queens to advocate for more focused interventions and resources?
Yeah, I think you can't wrap your arms around an issue until you actually see, like, the nuts and bolts of it. So, yeah.
All right, so you agree with all these things. Love it. Great. So, love that for you. All right. Well, next question. This is from Councilmember Savina Brooks-Powers. This is for NYPD. Does the NYPD have any data available specifically on missing children? If so, does this include data broken down by ACE, RAGE, and contributing factors? If not, does NYPD track this data?
Yes, to 80% of that. I don't know what contributing factors means. Did they give any clarification on what that means?
Or other contributing factors, like other things that might go along with, like, why they might be missing, other than, like, ACE, RAGE. And
Yeah, so the director just pointed out maybe mental health or something else related to that. You'd have to dive into every individual case to figure that out. But yes, we do track by precinct, age, race, gender.
All right.
It's a lot. I'm just saying.
It's okay that it's a lot. Like, I don't. Why are we afraid of it being a lot? Like, it's important for us to know that it's a lot. So then that gives us the information that we can fight for to get you more resources. So I don't care if it's a lot, and I'm sorry that it's making your job harder. Tell them not. You know, y'all always running up the overtime. Tell them to have somebody else do it. You know. But no, thank you guys today for being here. Do you have any more questions, Chair Salam? Actually, all right. Well, there you go.
Just a few very, very short ones. So I wanted to know if you can provide details about the training provided to officers assigned to work on human trafficking cases, and how often is this training updated to reflect emerging trends and best practices?
Sure. Like I said before, we have refresher courses that are required. Those are mandatory 3-day courses on best practices that are given usually 3 times a year for the child abuse squads and 4 times a year for the adult and trafficking squad is included in those. And then the other training that we do is like the trauma-informed training, these are outside organizations that are coming in. And in those refresher courses, we bring in the different people to talk about the best practices. And we have experts in human trafficking that come in and talk about the law enforcement piece and the trends in investigations.
Yeah, and in those, Chair, we do get topical, so every year it's different. You don't have the same three-day training every year, so depending on the new law, the rape is rape law that just started September 1st of 2024, that's something that would be in the training this year. So we always look at different things that are trending, different things that are coming out now, changes in the law and things like that that we add to our training.
And last question from me. To what extent do all NYPD officers receive training on identifying signs of trafficking during routine operations or investigations?
Chair, let me just make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Do you mean all NYPD officers, or do you mean specifically the people who are assigned this type of work? All?
Yeah, because I know that, in terms of the work, it's a lot that you all may be exposed to. So I'm just trying to find out, is there...
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. I didn't look into that, but I will double check and I can circle back with you for that information. All right? Unless. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is we do have a block of recruit training that my special victims trainers actually teach all the recruits that are coming into the police department. The other things I mentioned before is we do roll call trainings. We specifically, target different precincts for different type of reasons. So we ourselves as a unit, we're small, but we do reach out to our patrol partners. I know the training unit within the NYPD is working on something in regards to the main question that you have.
Thanks.
Amy, Savina Brooks Proverbs wanted to let me tell you to say hello. She texted me to say that specifically, so I don't want to get in trouble. Because she's on Zoom and she couldn't come in because we don't have quorum, but she said to let you know. She said hello, and you're doing great. I don't have any more questions, but I do just want to make a quick statement before I let the administration go. Just around today, there was another press conference about an additional 100 youth who were in our juvenile detention centers who experienced sexual violence. And that, to me, is a huge alarm, just in the sense around we're sitting here talking about sex trafficking, and then we cannot even keep people safe in our care. And some of the cases are as late as 2021. And so this is a huge problem for me. And although it is not as intertwined and related, but it is related, because we know that young people who experience trauma then come out and they're more vulnerable. And so we have to think about what this looks like moving forward, because this is unacceptable. And honestly, we cannot allow this to happen. We cannot talk about the underbelly and all these things, and then in our care, we are setting kids up for, failure. And this is not okay. And I just want to say that, and there will be definitely hearings and continual work around this issue because, you know, for the last couple of months, this has been something that has been at the top of the bill where I've been getting calls from advocates and people who've experienced this, and I actually had a round table last week around this, and the stories that I heard were 100% unacceptable, and this will not be tolerated on my watch. So I had to make a statement around that as well. And so I don't have any more questions for the administration, and so thank you all for being here today. Thank you. I now open the hearing for public testimony. I remind the members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recordings or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present video or audio recordings as testimony, but they may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant at Arms for the conclusion of the hearing. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's topic, support for young victims of human trafficking. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. I will now call the first panel. Brianna, is this Plummer? Palmer. Sebastian Vank. Erica Lee. Myrie Moses. Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Sebastian Vante, and I am the Associate Vice President of Street Work Programs at Safe Horizon. Safe Horizon's mission is to stand with those who have experienced violence, abuse, and exploitation. We offer unwavering support and advocate for systems change. Safe Horizon envisions a world where safety is a universal human right, and we all share a collective responsibility to protect and uphold it. We strive for a society where people are safe in their communities, homes, bodies, and minds. I'm honored to share with you the critical work we do to support homeless youth and young adults, a population that faces extraordinary challenges, including the very real risk of trafficking and exploitation. At Street Work, our mission is to meet homeless youth where they are, on the streets, in parks, or other public spaces, and provide immediate support and a path to stability. Traffickers prey on the vulnerability of these young people, targeting their lack of resources, safety, and support. This is why the collaboration between our Street Work project and Safe Horizon's anti-trafficking program is so vital. ATP provides our staff both in our drop-in centers and our outreach teams with specialized training to recognize the signs of trafficking and take appropriate steps to address their immediate and long-term needs. Whether during an intake conversation or while engaging youth in the field, our teams are equipped to identify red flags, ask the right questions, and connect these young people to critical resources that can help them escape exploitation and begin their healing journey. But the work doesn't stop there. Many of the youth we serve are also navigating complex immigration challenges. For these young people, our Immigration Law Project plays an essential role by offering legal assistance to those who may qualify for asylum, special immigrant juvenile status, or other protections We provide a lifeline for young people who are not only fleeing trafficking, but also seeking safety and stability in a new country. The legal protections and support we offer are often the key to helping them rebuild their lives free from fear and harm. To truly address the issue of trafficking, it is essential that street work and other runaway and homeless youth providers have the resources and support they need to identify survivors and offer immediate assistance. This requires strong partnerships with the mayor's administration and city council to ensure there is adequate funding, staffing, and training for programs like ours. With sufficient resources, we can make sure that every young person who is vulnerable to trafficking receives not just shelter, but also access to specialized programs that meet their unique needs. This work is deeply impactful because it saves lives. Each connection we make, whether through outreach, anti-trafficking support, legal assistance, or specialized care, is a step toward ensuring that these young people have the safety, dignity, and freedom they deserve. Human trafficking thrives in the shadows, but our work is about shining a light and empowering those most at risk. I am proud of the collaboration between our programs, the role we play in addressing these challenges, and the opportunity to advocate for the resources and support that make this work possible. I am also grateful for our partnership with the City Council and for your ongoing support for our work. Thank you for this opportunity to share this critical work with you today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Brianna Palmer, and I am an intern working with the anti-human trafficking team at Covenant House, New York, where we serve youth ages 16 to 24 who are experiencing homelessness. Many of these young people are survivors of human trafficking or have been at heightened risk of victimization. I want to thank the Committee on Public Safety and the bill's sponsors, Council Members Lewis, Stevens, Riley, Ressler, Farias, Williams, Brooks Powers, and Schulman for the opportunity to testify in support of intro number 831. Covenant House, New York is the largest provider of services to homeless youth in New York City, serving over 1,600 young people annually. Beyond providing safe shelter, we offer a comprehensive array of services, including medical care, mental health services, education, employment training, and critical legal assistance. Many of the young people who come to us have faced unimaginable trauma, including trafficking. The issue of missing persons is deeply intertwined with human trafficking. At Covenant House, New York, we know that when young people go missing, especially those from marginalized communities, they often become vulnerable to exploitation, including sex and labor trafficking. This proposed legislation represents a critical step forward toward addressing these vulnerabilities by requiring a comprehensive and annual reporting on missing persons cases in New York City. Having accurate and transparent data is essential to understanding the scope of the problem and crafting effective interventions. By disaggregating missing persons data by age, race, gender, and precinct, as well as including information on cases linked to trafficking, this bill provides a framework for identifying trends and responding more effectively to the needs of at-risk individuals. Mandating annual reports will highlight systemic disparities and trends in missing persons cases. The disaggregation of data ensures that we can see which populations are disproportionately affected and allocate resources accordingly. Requiring data on the percentage of resolved cases that involve trafficking victims underscores the link between missing persons and exploitation. This information will be invaluable for organizations like ours, which work tirelessly to support survivors and prevent trafficking. By institutionalizing this reporting, the NYPD will be better positioned to identify patterns, improve investigative strategies, and collaborate with community organizations to protect vulnerable individuals. This accountability also ensures that policies are data-driven and reflective of the realities faced by marginalized communities. At Covenant House, New York, many of the people we serve have been reported missing at some point in their lives. As a trafficking survivor myself, this was also true for me during my experience. These missing persons reports are often the first indication that a youth is in danger of exploitation. Unfortunately, existing gaps in reporting, data collection, and coordination have made it difficult to track these cases effectively and provide the interventions needed to prevent harm. This legislation will give organizations like ours the data needed to advocate for survivors, inform our services, and partner more effectively with law enforcement and policymakers. Additionally, it will send a clear message that New York City prioritizes the safety of its most vulnerable residents. We are grateful to the sponsors of this bill for recognizing the importance and transparency and accountability in addressing missing persons cases. Your leadership will not only prevent trafficking and exploitation, but also support the efforts of organizations like Covenant House New York that work daily to help young people reclaim their futures. I urge the City Council to pass Intro number 831. By doing so, we take a meaningful step forward, protecting our city's most vulnerable individuals and ensuring that no missing person is overlooked. Thank you for your time and commitment to this critical issue. Together, we can make New York City a safer and more equitable place for all of its residents.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Stevens, Chair Salam, and Chair Lewis, and members of the committees for allowing me to testify today. My name is Eric Lee. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Volunteers of America, Greater New York, a 128-year-old anti-poverty organization which operates 6 emergency and 1 Tier 2 domestic violence shelters in New York City. We also serve a large population of survivors within our general homeless family and women's shelters and are launching a federally funded transitional housing program for survivors of labor and sex trafficking later this year. First, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you, Chair Lewis, as well as members of the Council, NGBV Commissioner Sethi, and the administration for your leadership and support of Resolution 165 of 2022, calling on the state legislature to pass the SAFE Act. This would help single household survivors, which is often how survivors of trafficking present at intake, to access domestic violence shelters. While we are disappointed that the governor vetoed this bill, we are hopeful that the state legislature will reintroduce it, and we look forward to your continued support and leadership. Survivors of human trafficking may turn to domestic violence or general homeless shelters to flee their traffickers, but additional expertise and services are needed to better support them in their healing. VOA GNY, in recognition of this service gap, is standing up a new federally funded transitional housing program for survivors of trafficking, which includes a full-time human trafficking specialist to conduct outreach and public awareness, as well as offering specialized training for our staff within our domestic violence shelters on serving survivors of trafficking. Given the recent actions of the Trump administration's efforts to curtail federal funding to immigrant support organizations, we ask the Council to please consider adding local funding to help bridge the gap. Within our transitional housing programs, while our new transitional housing program will strengthen the skill sets of existing staff, there remains a need for deeper clinical expertise than current domestic violence contracts fund. Survivors suffering from traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, and other risk factors which can pose barriers to long-term safety and stability have acute needs related to physical or emotional trauma, mental health, or other crises. Case managers and social workers and other staff across our shelter sites would benefit from additional clinical support for their most complex and high-risk cases, and the ability to better connect clients to supports and services within local communities across the 5 boroughs. We would welcome the new resources from the Council and the administration to help provide enhanced services to support survivors. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Louis, Chair Stevens, and Chair Salam. Good afternoon. My name is Mari Moss. I am the proud mother of 3 young Harlem girls and a community advocate for families and communities. I serve on the Mayor's Task Force to End Gender and Domestic-Based Violence, the Neighborhood Advisory Board, the Community Action Board that gives federal funding to nonprofit organizations through DYCD, and We Love Harlem Initiative. I'm here today to express my strong support for Intro 831, a critical step forward to protecting children and families and addressing systemic failures within our institutions. One of the most urgent issues this legislation addresses is the criminalization of parenthood, particularly motherhood, in domestic violence cases. Far too often, protective mothers are penalized by the very systems that should support them, with children being unjustly removed from their care. This not only traumatizes families, but also exposes children to greater risks, including exploitation and trafficking. When parental rights are ignored and weaponized, the consequences are devastating. Practices like parental alienation and systemic neglect allow harm to thrive. We already have laws in place to safeguard survivors and their children, but these laws are not consistently or effectively enforced, leaving families vulnerable and unsupported. Intro 831 is a vital step in ensuring greater accountability and collaboration. Workers in child welfare must regularly be vetted to guarantee they are following proper protocols and safeguarding families. Agencies such as ACS, the Child Trafficking Prevention Department, and the domestic violence units of ACS within the agency must collaboratively, closely work together. The Family Justice Center and the End Gender and Domestic-Based Violence Task Force must also work with a cross-cutting agency coordination. This is essential to ensure survivors are not slipping through the cracks and that families receive the support they need. Additionally, education and preventative measures must be prioritized. Young people need to be taught to recognize violations, understand their rights, and know what resources are available to them. Through collaborative efforts, preventative programs, and community outreach, we can empower youth to protect themselves and create a culture of safety and awareness. As a mother and advocate, I've seen these failures firsthand. My experiences navigating these systems inspired me to write the letter to legislation, a call to action addressing these systemic issues. Supported by leaders across all government, these initiatives align with the goals of Intro 831 by advocating for reforms that protect children, empower families, and ensure justice is upheld. We cannot afford to allow these systems to continue to fail our most vulnerable. Intro 831 is a powerful tool in the fight to educate, train, vet, and reform these agencies. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to commend you all for standing up. I don't really have a question, I don't think. I'm just thinking about what else can we do? And I'm thinking about that from the perspective of even classroom education, that allows for folks who are vulnerable, who may not necessarily know or understand what it is that they are experiencing, and also for friends who might be able to stand in that gap to assist in some way, form, or fashion. So I'm not sure if we have all of the answers that really, really speak to the need of the vulnerable communities that you all are a part of and supporting. But whatever we can do, I'm sure we want to do all that we can for that, towards that effort.
I would just like to speak to that very quickly. We just can't keep sweeping things under the rug. We keep ignoring the issues, the elephants in the room, so to speak, just to keep things comfortable and copacetic. And our community is very close-knit. Everybody pretty much knows everybody, Our churches are like families, but we have to address the issues and not sweep them under the rug. We have to talk about them actively. We need to have forums about them if we need to, but we need to protect the vulnerable and stop protecting perpetuators of violence.
I just want to add, one of the things that we found very effective in the population that we work with, specifically runaway and homeless youth in our drop-in centers, but also in our shelters, is that we create a very sex-positive environment, which allows for young folks to kind of engage staff in conversations that may seem really sensitive, and in that we may determine or find out a little deeper things around like some of the things that some of our young folks are experiencing. So I think kind of creating that environment that allows young folks to reach out and touch and connect with staff around things around sexual health or things that they may be experiencing that they're not quite understanding. I feel like has created a better connection in allowing us to connect them to appropriate resources. So just to kind of add to that point where you were making about school, I think, not, demonizing certain things or criminalizing certain things, but allowing for that kind of open dialogue and conversations around things that we consider sensitive, like sex. So just putting that out there.
And I just want to add, I remember when I visited Safe Horizon, that was one of the things you guys definitely talked about, of having a sex-positive place. So it wasn't as taboo, especially I think in a lot of youth organizations. It's always looked at as shame, and so young people don't want to talk around adults and all the things, and so which is why it leaves them so vulnerable on being sex trafficked, because there's this sense of shame that's being put on it. So definitely love to hear that you guys are doing actual outreach on the ground and going out into communities and not just waiting for them to show up in your centers and facilities and things like that. But and thank you for being so brave and showing up here today and sharing your story and putting support around this bill that I know Chair Lewis has been advocating for a number of years at this point. So I was just so happy we were able to hear, because it is a critical step. We know that women of color are some of the highest numbers around missing in this country and are often silenced. And, I had a resolution a couple years back on BIPOC women and missing. And, we had to put a lot of pressure even for the governor to sign it into law. And so thank you for showing up here and supporting this bill, because I do think it is a critical step and in the right direction to being able to identify or have some support around it. So I don't have any more questions for this panel, so thank you for joining us today. After our in-person testimony is done, this concludes the in-person portion of our public testimony. We will now move to remote testimony. If you are testifying remotely, please listen for your name to be called. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you. You may then start your testimony once the sergeant arm sets the clock and cue you to begin. I will call Jennifer, what is this? Madeira. Jennifer Madeira, going once, going twice. All right, we'll move on. We will be going to Tanisha Grant.
Thank you so much, Chair Stevens, Chair Lewis, and Chair Salam. My name is Tanisha Grant. I am the Executive Director of Parent Support and Parents New York. We are based in Harlem and Washington Heights. I want to share my personal story. I was one of these trafficked youth. I was put into the system at birth, and I aged out the system at 17, straight to having a baby, straight to being trafficked and being on Hut's Point. There was never any support for children like me, for youth like me. What I got was a jail cell. So I am very, very, very happy to see you guys doing this work. I have some concerns. This work is being led by ACS and the police, and that's not too good for us. I deal with children that are being trafficked, youth that are being trafficked all the time, and the first thing they say to me, you guys, is don't call the police. Don't call ACS. I think that people who have lived experience really need to be called in. I just got an award for being a volunteer from the president. So I am telling you now that there are people like me that are willing to lend our lived experience and also our time to help the youth that is happening right now. I want to say that this is a generational thing. And there are lots of children that get left behind and fall beneath the cracks. Also, these programs or whatever support that these systems are offering are not publicized in our community. A lot of things I heard today, I'm hearing for the first time, and I'm very nosy about what's going on in our community. So while this legislation is great first steps, I'm
Thank you. Your time's expired.
More support for our youth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And you've been at a number of our hearings and sharing your stories and advocating for young people and making sure that they don't have to have the experience that that you've experienced. So, one, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing. And I guess the question I wanted to ask you, and I know you talked about having folks who have lived experience lead this work. Could you talk about like what that vision would look like for you? And ideally, obviously, most young people who are in these situations are like, don't call the cops because they think they're going to get criminalized, or don't call ACS because I don't want to be back in foster care. So what are some of your suggestions around what that could look like if those, you know, if you don't call those? Because I mean, obviously, you're encountering some of these young people. So what are some of the things that you're doing to work with them?
First of all, thank you for your question, Chair Stevens. Our young people need to feel safe. And most times, the people that are going to make you feel safe is people that have had your lived experience. So there's things that young people will talk to me about that they won't talk to social workers about, that they won't talk to people from ACS about, that they won't talk to police about. So it's really about encouraging you guys to work with people like me to make sure that when the youth don't want to go to ACS or to the police or to some of these larger nonprofits, that you have people, community-based organizations, and people in the community like me that you can call as well. But if we're not being pulled to the table to discuss these issues, and to lend our support and our expertise, then we're kind of defeating the purpose. If we're going straight to, let's give it to these agencies that we know have a horrible history of supporting our youth, then I just urge y'all to rethink that. And I'm always here, Chair Stevens, Chair Lewis, and Chair Salam. Y'all all know me. I'm not going nowhere.
No, we really appreciate that.
I mean, I definitely appreciate your testimony as well. I'm thinking about the cross-section of all that's been said today, and I think the voice of the victims who have survived is really speaking volumes. To that, one of the things that I'm concerned about is how do we stop this? And what I'm trying to figure out is putting those parts in place. I know you said we want to make sure that, you know, people who are victimized feel safe, and I'm definitely in support of that 1,000%. But I also want to make sure, or I shouldn't say but, in addition, I want to make sure, in fact, that this type of behavior does not go unchecked. And so those individuals that are out there doing these types of things, preying on our children, or preying on the most vulnerable, are there steps that you're envisioning that speak specifically to, okay, if we do this first, then we can do this other stuff? Because we've heard testimony from the NYPD about, you know, sometimes victims feel extremely unsafe when there's a 6'4" individual standing over them and they're just there. It's not like they're trying to intimidate, but to the victim, it feels intimidating. It feels pressuring. It feels like I'm being victimized all over again. I don't want to do this. So that's my question.
Thank you, Chair Salam, for your question. I think what we need to look at are the systemic problems inside the system. As I said, I was left at birth in Lincoln Hospital. So I spent my whole childhood, I had a failed adoption and winded right back up in the system at 11. Right now, today, I sometimes have to work with the agency that traded me away, which is Children's Aid Society, which is now has been rebranded as Children Aid. But if we know our history, we know that Children Aid Society is also the orchestrators of the orphan train. I think we have a lot of systemic issues inside our system that we have not addressed. There are a lot of foster care agencies. There are a lot of people who work inside these agencies that do the same thing that people did 20, 30 years ago. A lot of times why our youth don't feel safe is because they have not been nurtured in these places, right? They have not been nurtured in foster care. They not have been nurtured by any ACS workers that they have encountered. So if we could stop the harm that where these children feel like they're looking for any type of love. That's why a lot of children get trafficked, because they are looking for someone to love them. And if they can go out on the street and make some money and have a pimp say good job, it makes them feel like they are valued. So if we can value our children before they encounter these very, very, very destructive, emotions, and shower them with love and care before that would be great. We need more support inside the system to support our children before they even get to that point where they can be trafficked.
Ms. Grant? Did she log off?
I'm here. Hey, Chair Lewis.
Hey, girl.
Hey, girl.
A quick question, because I know we have to end soon. I'm listening to everything you're saying, and I want to thank you for joining us, for your vulnerability, as well as everyone else that came here earlier to testify. Like you, I'm a Black woman, and like you, we got to learn how to hustle, right, to get to where we need to be. And you went through a lot, so you definitely have that lived experience. I wanted to know if you could share with us briefly and quickly, how do you work with what you got? You heard from the agencies today, NYPD and ACS. While we're trying to make strides to change the system and to break down the systemic barriers that cause these ongoing issues, share with us, how do we work with what we currently have as we continue to work diligently to make those changes? Because these are the agencies that are currently working on it, and we can't deny that. You can't beat a dead horse, right? You got to work with what you got. You're a hustler, I'm a hustler. How do we work with what we got?
I think that you encourage these agencies to really bring in people like me. Bring in people that's going to say, no, that's not the way to do it. Like, I feel like a lot of people who work in this field don't have the lens of, lived experience. This is a profession to them. This is a job to them. But to me, this is my life. These are our children's lives. So there has to be better cooperation where it's not, the systems at the top and the people that hustle, like you said, and the people that literally have dedicated their lives to helping other people because they have the lived experience are left at the bottom and out of the conversation.
Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for always showing up and being such an advocate in these spaces. And just so you know, because you're not in here in the chambers today, so you don't see, ACS is still in the building, and so hopefully they heard what you said, right, around how do we make sure that we're connecting the dots, because in their testimony, they did say they have an Incredibles Messengers program that they're working on, and I did encourage DYCD to do the same, to support providers on that and do some type of collaboration. So I think this is a beautiful opportunity where we can have some collaboration and cross between someone saying that they want to help and be a part of the solution, and city agencies hearing that and taking that in and figuring out how to make that happen. So that's my hope. And like I said at the beginning of this hearing is about us talking about something that is the underbelly of this city that no one wants to talk about, because no one wants us to think that young people are being trafficked in the city, just like they don't like to talk about homeless young people, right? And so for me, it's about how do we shine the light on these issues, and they're not the underbelly, so that we can come up with solutions together to support our young people. And so thank you so much for being such an advocate. Thank you to ACS, DYCD, NYPD, and what was the gender? NGBE, who was also here to talk about solutions. And we're going to continue to work together to really develop solutions that are helping our young people and making them feel safe and making them understand that they should not walk around with shame. And we should be the ones that are ashamed, because this is happening in our city under our watch. So thank you, everyone. And with that, I close this hearing.